I think there's the issue that's looming in the background, and then there's the real issue in the case. So maybe we can go through those because they're separate.
Sure.
So President Biden has proposed in each of the last two budgets to tax unrealized gains for people with a net worth of $100 million or more. So what that means is if a tech billionaire has a lot of appreciated stock, built-in gain, it's quite large. As we said, currently that person doesn't have to pay tax. They can borrow, they can hold the stock, they can even hedge the stock, and they can pass it on and it'll never get taxed. And under this provision, if Congress passed it, they didn't, but if at some point they did, then there would be an immediate tax on the built-in appreciation. So you have stock worth $200 million, you'd pay a $200 million tax. And President Biden proposed to spread the payments out because there's a recognition that there are liquidity issues and so on. And so that's, now, to my mind, that's still an income tax, not a wealth tax, because what the system is doing is measuring how much your wealth has increased. And traditionally, we measure that with a sale, but it doesn't mean you have to measure it with a sale. And there are ways in which the system already does things like what I just described. Another part of this conversation is that Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, others have proposed a wealth tax. And a wealth tax would be not just, hey, how much gain does Bob have in his stock? Let's tax that once. But just how much wealth does Bob have? We're going to tax that every year. And you could think of an income tax as a tax on getting rich, and a wealth tax is a tax on being rich. Now, we don't have a wealth tax in the US. I think it's probably unconstitutional to have a wealth tax in the US. But since it hasn't been tried, there at least hasn't been tried lately, that's just theoretical.
Can I ask you, David, just real fast? So one thing is, and I know some economists argue about this, but to me, a capital gain is income, like economically speaking. Like I don't care about the tax code, just saying like if I'm thinking about a theoretical economy, when you pin down what do you mean by income, it's like one definition is it's the amount of consumption you can enjoy over a given time period without lowering your wealth. And so if that's your definition, then obviously a capital gain in which your assets increase in value, you could consume that down back to your starting point. And that would have to mean a capital gain is income. And then you're saying you don't tax. Well, is a property tax a tax on wealth in a sense, like a subset of your wealth? Okay.
Correct. And the states have property taxes, and the federal government cannot constitutionally impose a real estate tax unless it follows a kind of a challenging mechanism called apportionment. And basically what apportionment means is that the amount of tax that they collect from people in a state has to be the same percentage as that state's population in the country. So the idea is if Massachusetts and West Virginia have the same population, and let's say, and it isn't true, but let's say that it's 1/50th of the US, then each state citizen should pay 1/50th of the tax. Now, that's not a big deal if the property values in West Virginia and Massachusetts are the same, because then you could have the same tax rate. But let's say it turns out that the property values in West Virginia are half the level of the property taxes in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is a wealthier state, and I think it actually is the second wealthiest state in the country. So if that's true, then the tax rate in Massachusetts would be half of the tax rate in West Virginia. Under this idea of apportionment, if each state has to give its share, and the share is based not on how wealthy the state is, but on how many people it has, then you have the ironic effect that the poorer the state, the higher the tax rate. And this is not something that particularly appeals to members of Congress. So although in theory, they can impose a federal property tax, they'd have to do it with this apportionment. And so they generally aren't going to do that.
Hey everybody, this is Bob Murphy. Thanks for listening to this clip from the InFi podcast. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, please consider subscribing and share this video with others. We've got new episodes dropping every Friday with more insightful discussions. Stay tuned.